Have you ever wondered why, despite all your spiritual practices and prayers, true transformation still feels just beyond your reach? What if everything you've been taught about connecting with the divine has been fundamentally misunderstood? Throughout history, spiritual seekers have climbed mountains, built temples, and performed countless rituals, all in pursuit of something they believed was separate from themselves. Has this ever happened to you? That feeling of reaching, stretching, and straining toward a divine presence that somehow always seems just out of grasp. This endless seeking may be the very thing blocking your spiritual breakthrough. When Jesus uttered those two simple words, "I am," he wasn't merely identifying himself. He was revealing the most profound spiritual truth ever spoken, a truth so revolutionary that it has the power to dissolve every problem you're facing right now without any effort on your part. These two words contain the entire secret of spiritual power, healing, and abundance. Most of us have completely misunderstood this teaching. We've been conditioned to believe that God is something outside ourselves, a separate entity we must petition through prayer, meditation, and good works. We've created elaborate systems of approaching this distant deity, hoping to receive blessings, healing, and abundance. But what if this fundamental assumption is exactly what's keeping you trapped in limitation? The revelation that transformed Joel Goldsmith's life and the lives of thousands of his students is this: God isn't something you reach for, God is the very I that you are. This isn't blasphemy, it's the direct teaching of Jesus himself. When he said, "I and the Father are one," he wasn't claiming a special status available only to him. He was declaring a universal truth about your identity, about the nature of consciousness itself. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching. From today, it's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Stay with me until the end, because this understanding changes everything, not by giving you new techniques or practices, but by awakening you to what has always been true about your being. This isn't about becoming more spiritual or achieving a higher state. It's about recognizing that the I that you are is already the complete expression of infinite spirit. What you're about to discover might surprise you, especially if you've spent years trying to connect with a God you believed was separate from yourself. The truth is both simpler and more profound than most spiritual teachings have led you to believe. When Jesus turned water into wine, healed the sick, and even raised the dead, he wasn't accessing some special power unavailable to you. He was simply living from a consciousness that knew itself as the I am. If these teachings on the I Am resonate with you, join our spiritual community by hitting subscribe. Together, we're exploring the depths of consciousness and awakening to our true identity. Now, I want to go even deeper into this profound revelation. When Joel Goldsmith speaks about the I Am, he's pointing to something far more significant than most people realize. This isn't merely a philosophical concept. It's the hidden truth at the core of your being. The I Am isn't a statement about your human self, your personality, your history, or your current circumstances. It's the infinite presence expressing as you right now. Think about the revolutionary impact this understanding can have on your journey. When you say I am with spiritual awareness, you're not speaking as a limited person struggling through life. You're speaking as consciousness itself. The same consciousness that has existed before time and will continue beyond it. This distinction isn't just semantic, it's the cornerstone of genuine spiritual transformation. But here's where most of us make a critical mistake in our mindset. We constantly misuse these powerful words. Pay attention to how you speak to yourself throughout the day. I am sick. I am broke. I am afraid. I am not good enough. With each declaration, you're making a profound decision about your identity. Every time you attach "I am" to a condition or limitation, you're giving power to illusion and identifying the infinite with the finite. This might be the most important revelation you encounter on your spiritual path. You're essentially claiming that God, the I of your being, is limited by temporary circumstances. This misidentification is the root cause of all suffering, not what happens to you externally, but what you claim "I am" is. Consider how this understanding changes everything. The circumstances of your life aren't random events happening to a separate person. They're experiences flowing through the one consciousness that you are. When you begin to recognize this truth, you initiate a profound inner transformation that naturally alters your outer experience. Joel discovered through decades of spiritual practice and healing work that our problems persist, not because they're so powerful, but because we've been mistakenly identifying with them. When you say "I am in pain," you've bound the infinite to a temporary condition. When you say "I am struggling financially," you've limited the expression of abundant life that is your true nature. The ancient wisdom traditions all point to this same understanding, though it's often veiled in symbolic language. The journey isn't about becoming something new. It's about revealing what has always been true beneath the layers of false identity. As you shed these misidentifications, you naturally align with the unlimited expression of being. If you're sensing a resonance with these ideas, if something within you is recognizing a truth beyond intellectual understanding, write in the comments, "I am awakening to truth." Now let's examine how this principle transforms our approach to everyday challenges. Look at the powerful revelation in how Jesus himself used these words. Have you noticed that in all the gospel accounts, Jesus never once said, "I am sick" or "I am lacking"? This wasn't coincidental. It was a deliberate demonstration of spiritual mastery. Instead, he made declarations like, "I am the resurrection," "I am the light," "I am the way." Each statement was a conscious identification with the infinite, not with temporary conditions or circumstances. This pattern reveals a profound blueprint for our own spiritual journey. When you align your "I am" statements only with eternal truths, your entire experience naturally begins to mirror that consciousness. This isn't positive thinking or wishful affirmation. It's the operation of spiritual law. The vibration of your being shifts when you claim your true identity rather than falsely identifying with limitations. Here's a behind-the-scenes revelation that few spiritual teachers fully explain. The "I am" isn't something you need to create, develop, or achieve through years of practice. It already is the foundation of your being. You don't become the "I am" through meditation, good works, or spiritual achievement. You simply stop identifying with what you are not. The process is one of unveiling rather than becoming. This shift in understanding completely transforms your approach to challenges. Every problem you're experiencing exists not because you've failed to reach some spiritual height, but because you've momentarily forgotten that the I that you are is God expressing. Not something that will be or can become in the future, but what already is in this eternal moment. The mindset revolution here is subtle but profound. Most spiritual paths emphasize becoming something better, higher, or more evolved. But the I pathway Joel Goldsmith discovered through deep contemplation was not about addition, but subtraction, removing the false identifications that obscure your true nature. Think about how this impacts your daily decisions. When faced with illness, financial challenges, or relationship difficulties, the automatic response is usually to see yourself as a person with problems needing solutions. But from the I am perspective, you recognize these as temporary appearances in consciousness, not the truth of your being. This isn't denial, it's seeing from a higher dimension of awareness. The secret to Jesus' healing work wasn't that he had special powers unavailable to you. His mastery came from his unwavering consciousness of what I am truly means. When he healed the sick, multiplied loaves and fishes, or calmed the storm, he wasn't manipulating matter through mystical forces. He was simply being the I am, allowing the infinite to express through him without resistance or misidentification. You've likely experienced glimpses of this truth in moments of deep peace or clarity, times when your sense of separate self temporarily dissolved and you felt connected to something vast and perfect. These weren't just pleasant spiritual experiences. They were momentary recognitions of your true identity as the I am. If you've had such an experience where you felt completely at peace despite challenging external circumstances, type in the comments, "I've tasted the I am." Let's continue exploring how this understanding transforms our approach to healing. Let's apply this understanding to one of life's most challenging experiences, illness. When you're facing a health crisis, the natural human reaction is to say, "I am sick and I need healing." But notice what happens in that statement. You've identified your essential self with the condition. You've claimed sickness as your identity. This seemingly innocent declaration actually denies the deepest truth of your being. Here's the revolutionary perspective Joel Goldsmith discovered through working with thousands of healing cases. The I that you are cannot be sick because that I is infinite spirit. The body may indeed show symptoms, pain, fever, dysfunction, but that's not the I. Those symptoms are appearing in your experience, but they don't define your essential nature. The I am is perfect, whole, complete, and always has been. This isn't a mind game or wishful thinking. It's a profound shift in identification that affects your entire being. When you rest in this knowing, not fighting symptoms or desperately seeking cures, but simply recognizing what you truly are, healing often happens naturally. It's not that you're denying the appearance, you're simply refusing to identify with it. I want to share a breakthrough insight that transformed my understanding of spiritual practice. Most teachings throughout history have given us something to do. Visualize white light, repeat affirmations, manifest through mental imagery, perform rituals. The spiritual journey becomes an endless series of techniques and practices. But Jesus revealed something far more powerful than any technique, a state of being. The I am is not an action, it's a recognition. When this understanding dawns within you, something remarkable happens. You stop trying to get things from God through prayer or meditation, and you start realizing that God is already the substance of your being, expressing as your experience. The shift is from doing to being, from seeking to finding, from becoming to recognizing. Think about the immense freedom this brings to your spiritual journey. No more endless striving to become worthy of divine blessings. No more complex practices to attract what you need. No more feeling that enlightenment is far away in some distant future. Instead, there's a deep rest in the recognition of what already is, the perfect, complete I am expressing as you. This transition from spiritual doing to spiritual being represents the most significant paradigm shift in consciousness. It's like a person who has been swimming frantically against the current, suddenly realizing they can simply float, allowing the river to carry them effortlessly. The effort wasn't helping, it was hindering the natural flow. When health challenges appear in your experience, the tendency is to battle them through willpower, treatments, and desperate prayers. But what if the most powerful response isn't fighting at all? What if true healing comes from simply recognizing your unalterable perfection as the I am, not denying symptoms need attention, but refusing to identify with them as your essential self? If you've experienced a moment where simply letting go and recognizing your true nature brought unexpected healing or resolution to a problem, share in the comments. Surrender brought my breakthrough. Let's explore how this principle fundamentally transforms our understanding of healing itself. This revelation completely transforms our understanding of what healing actually is. We've been taught that healing means changing conditions, fixing what's broken, eliminating symptoms, or restoring what was lost. But Joel Goldsmith discovered a profound truth through working with thousands of cases. Healing isn't about changing conditions at all. It's about changing identity. When you truly know yourself as the I am, conditions have no choice but to align with that truth. This isn't magical thinking. It's the natural law of consciousness expressing. You don't heal the body. You recognize that the I of your being was never sick in the first place. You don't create abundance. You recognize that the I am is infinite supply already expressing. The shift is from trying to fix what seems broken to recognizing the unbroken reality that lies beneath appearances. This breakthrough understanding completely rewrites the spiritual journey. The transformation isn't in changing outer conditions, but in recognizing the unchangeable truth of your being. Everything in your experience is a reflection of your consciousness, not what you're thinking about, but what you're identifying as. When identification shifts, experience must follow. Let me share a powerful real-world revelation from Joel's practice. A woman named Margaret had suffered with debilitating chronic pain for 7 years. Doctors found no medical explanation despite countless tests and treatments. She'd tried everything: medication, therapy, alternative treatments, spiritual healing. Nothing worked. When she finally came to Joel, she was desperate and had nearly lost all hope. What Joel did next reveals the essence of spiritual healing. He didn't pray for her. He didn't treat her condition. He simply asked her one penetrating question: who is the I that says I am in pain? Margaret was initially confused by this approach. She answered, I'm the one suffering. But Joel pressed deeper. Is the I am you speak of capable of pain? Can infinite spirit hurt? Can God suffer? She sat in silence for nearly 20 minutes, contemplating this question. Then something profound shifted in her consciousness. She realized she'd been identifying her true self, the I am, with a body and its sensations. In that moment of clarity, she saw that the pain didn't belong to the I that she was. It belonged to a false sense of identity she had been maintaining. Subscribe to continue this journey of spiritual discovery with us. Each video unveils another dimension of the I am consciousness that transforms how you experience every aspect of life. This wasn't just an intellectual understanding, it was a fundamental shift in consciousness. Within 3 months, the pain that had dominated her life for 7 years completely vanished. Not because she fought it or found some miracle cure, but because she stopped claiming it as her identity. The healing came not through changing the condition, but through changing identification. The mindset revolution here is that we've been approaching healing backward. We've been trying to manipulate effects while ignoring the cause. We've been fighting symptoms while reinforcing the very identification that produces them. When Margaret stopped saying, I am in pain, and recognized the truth, that the I am she truly was could never experience pain, the false condition had no choice but to dissolve. If this approach to healing resonates with you on a deeper level than traditional methods, type in the comments, identity precedes healing. Let's explore how this same principle transforms our relationship with abundance and financial challenges. The principle of I am consciousness works just as powerfully in the material world as it does with health. Consider the story of Robert, a businessman who was facing complete financial collapse. His company was on the edge of bankruptcy, drowning in debt, watching everything he'd built over decades crumble before his eyes. Every morning, he'd wake up with the same devastating thought: I am failing, I am losing everything. His prayers reflected this consciousness. Desperate pleas for God to rescue his business, to send customers, to provide some external miracle. This approach kept him locked in a mindset of lack, reinforcing the very limitation he was trying to overcome. Then Robert encountered Joel's teaching about the I am. In a profound moment of revelation, he realized he'd been claiming lack and failure as his identity. He'd been saying, "I am broke," instead of recognizing that the I of his being is infinite supply. This wasn't just a semantic shift, it was a fundamental transformation in consciousness. Robert began a revolutionary daily practice. Every morning, before looking at numbers or emails or the mounting bills, he would sit quietly and recognize, I am is the abundance of God. I am is infinite resource. I am is divine intelligence expressing. Notice he wasn't asking for these qualities. He was recognizing them as the truth of his being. The transformation wasn't instantaneous. It took 4 months, not 4 days. But gradually ideas began appearing in his awareness that had been invisible before. Connections opened, opportunities presented themselves that he couldn't have manufactured through strategic planning. His business didn't just survive, it transformed into something more aligned with his true purpose. The behind-the-scenes truth was that the change didn't happen in his circumstances. First, it happened in his consciousness. When he stopped identifying with lack, abundance had space to flow through him naturally. This wasn't positive thinking, it was accurate identification with reality. Joel's approach to helping others was equally revolutionary. A mother came to him devastated about her son's addiction. She'd tried everything: intervention, therapy, tough love, enabling. Nothing worked. Her son kept using, kept disappearing, kept breaking her heart. She was exhausted, guilt-ridden, desperate for someone to fix her child. Joel gave her guidance that initially shocked her. Stop praying for your son to change. Stop seeing him as an addict. Stop identifying him with his condition. Instead, recognize the truth. Your son's real identity is I am the presence of God, and that presence cannot be addicted. That presence is whole, free, and perfect right now. See only that truth, regardless of what appears. For 6 months, she practiced this radical approach. Some days, her son seemed worse, but she held firmly to the truth of his being, not the appearance of his behavior. She stopped mothering the addiction and started recognizing the Christ. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, something shifted in him. He entered treatment on his own initiative and stayed. Years later, he remains free, not because she changed him, but because she stopped empowering the false identity. This revelation demolishes our conventional approach to helping others. We think we need to fix people, change them, or heal their problems. But Joel discovered that true healing comes when we stop reinforcing their false identity and instead recognize what they truly are. This isn't passive acceptance of destructive behavior. It's active recognition of a deeper truth that lies beneath appearance. If you've ever experienced the frustration of trying to change someone only to find them resisting more strongly, type in the comments, "Recognition trumps correction." Let's examine how to practically apply this understanding in your daily life through specific practices. Now, I want to go even deeper into how we actually embody this transformative understanding in our daily lives. Grasping the I am intellectually is important, but it doesn't transform your experience unless you practice it until it becomes your natural state of being. Joel called this vital discipline practicing the presence. This isn't about thinking about God or praying to God. It's about recognizing that the I of your being is God expressing right here, right now, in this very moment. The beauty of this practice lies in its simplicity. You can begin with the smallest moments of your day. When you first wake up, before your mind fills with problems and tasks, recognize I am awake. Not as a person waking to face another difficult day, but as infinite consciousness expressing as this particular experience. When you eat, recognize, I am sustained by infinite substance. When you work, recognize, I am is the intelligence accomplishing this task. The subtle but crucial distinction here is that this isn't affirmation, it's recognition. Affirmations try to make something true that you believe isn't yet true. They come from a mindset of lack, attempting to create what you don't have. Recognition, however, comes from wholeness, acknowledging what has always been present. One struggles, the other rests. One seeks, the other realizes. This distinction makes all the difference in your journey toward freedom. For those inevitable moments when life presents crisis or intense challenge, Joel taught a powerful technique he simply called the pause. When fear grips you, when pain overwhelms you, when circumstances seem impossible, pause everything. Don't react. Don't try to solve. Don't panic. Simply pause and return to the I am. This simple decision interrupts the momentum of false identity and creates space for truth to emerge. In the pause, you ask yourself one question. What is the truth of my being right now? Not what appears, but what is eternally true. And the answer is always the same. I am is the presence of God, untouched by any condition. I am is whole. I am is supplied. I am is safe. Not because circumstances prove it, but because this is the unchangeable nature of infinite being expressing as you. A woman used this technique during a medical emergency. Her doctor found a suspicious mass and scheduled immediate surgery. Terror consumed her, but she remembered a pause. Every time fear arose, she stopped. She didn't deny the situation or fight the fear. She simply returned to truth. I am is perfect life. I am cannot be threatened. By the time of her pre-surgery scan, the mass had completely vanished. The power of the pause isn't in escaping reality. It's in returning to a deeper reality beneath appearances. It's not positive thinking. It's accurate identification. When we pause the automatic reactions of the human mind and return to the I am, we create space for infinite intelligence to express in ways our limited thinking could never devise. If you've experienced a moment where pausing and stepping back from a problem actually revealed the solution, share in the comments. The pause revealed the path. Let's explore why this approach sometimes meets resistance and how to navigate the challenges that arise when living from I am consciousness. Living from I am consciousness might sound simple in theory, but the practical journey comes with profound challenges that few spiritual teachers openly discuss. Let me take you behind the scenes of what really happens when you begin this transformation. The first hurdle you'll likely encounter is when nothing seems to change. You practice, you recognize, you identify as I am, and yet your circumstances remain exactly the same. The illness continues, the financial lack persists, the relationship problem doesn't dissolve. In these moments your mind screams, "This doesn't work, you're fooling yourself. You need to take action, do something to fix it the old way, through human effort and struggle." Joel's answer to this challenge was simple but not easy. Spiritual realization works in consciousness first, not in conditions. Sometimes the inner shift happens quickly and outer change follows immediately. Other times, the inner work takes weeks or months of consistent practice before you see any evidence in the physical world. Your task isn't to make things happen. Your task is to know the truth and remain faithful to it, regardless of appearances. This requires a revolutionary mindset that measures progress by your inner peace, not by outer conditions. When you can remain calm in the midst of seeming chaos, that's evidence your consciousness is truly shifting. Another significant challenge emerges when others react negatively to your transformation. When you start living from I am consciousness, you become different. You stop complaining. You stop participating in fear-based conversations. You stop agreeing that circumstances are terrible and hopeless. Some people will think you're in denial, others will assume you've joined some strange cult, some will actively try to pull you back into agreement with limitation. A man in Joel's classes lost several close friends when he stopped engaging in their constant complaints about money, health, and politics. They thought he didn't care. They accused him of being cold, disconnected, superior. But he wasn't judging them. He simply couldn't participate in claiming lack and limitation as truth anymore. He had to choose between the comfort of agreement and the integrity of consciousness. Perhaps the most insidious challenge is impatience. We want transformation now. We want healing today. We want abundance this week. But consciousness unfolds at its own pace. A seed doesn't become a tree overnight. The invisible work happens first. Roots go deep before the shoot appears above ground. Your consistent practice is the root work. Trust that something is happening even when you see no evidence. When you can navigate these challenges and continue practicing, something remarkable begins to unfold. Living as I am is no longer something you do during meditation or when problems arise. It becomes your constant state. You wake as I am, you walk as I am, you work as I am, you love as I am, you rest as I am. Every experience becomes the infinite expressing in finite form. This doesn't mean you suddenly become perfect in behavior. You'll still make mistakes, still have preferences, still experience the full range of human emotions. But underneath it all, you know what you are. Like a wave that still looks and moves like a wave, but never forgets it's the ocean. You live as a unique expression that knows itself as the infinite presence. If you've experienced moments where you've caught a glimpse of this state of being, where you felt completely at peace with who you are beneath all appearances, write in the comments, I recognize my true nature. Let's explore how this understanding transforms our relationships with others in profound ways. As we've explored these profound teachings together, I hope you've glimpsed the revolutionary power that comes when you stop seeking and allow the I Am to speak through you. This understanding isn't just another spiritual concept, it's the living truth at the core of your being, waiting to be recognized and expressed through every dimension of your life. What Joel Goldsmith discovered through decades of practice and healing work was that the I Am isn't something to achieve or become. It's who you already are beneath all appearances. When you stop identifying with conditions and recognize your true nature as the infinite expressing, transformation happens naturally, not through struggle or effort, but through recognition and rest in what has always been true. If this message resonates with your soul, if you sense there's something here beyond intellectual understanding, I invite you to become part of our community of spiritual seekers. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, as we continue exploring these timeless teachings that transform consciousness from the inside out. If these teachings have touched something deep within you today, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment with the words, I am awakening, to connect with others on this same journey of recognition. And if you found value in today's exploration, gently tap that like button as a way of saying yes to your own unfolding awareness of who you truly are. The journey of recognizing the I Am continues in our next video, where we'll explore how this consciousness transforms relationships in ways you might never have imagined. Click right here to continue this discovery with me. The infinite is waiting to be recognized as you. There are moments in life when a simple statement becomes a doorway into an entirely new level of awareness. We read words, hear ideas, or encounter truths that we think we understand, until one day they strike us with such clarity that everything shifts. That is what happens when you finally grasp, not intellectually but internally, what it truly means that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This is not merely a biblical proverb. It is a universal law, a spiritual principle, a psychological truth, and an existential mirror. It reveals why you feel drawn to certain things and repelled by others. It explains why your mind becomes anxious over some areas but strangely calm in others. It reveals the hidden roots of your decisions, your desires, your frustrations, and your destiny. For most people, this principle is something they think they've already mastered. Sure, they say, my treasure is in God, in family, in what truly matters. But if you examine their daily habits, emotional reactions, time investment, and internal turmoil, a different picture often emerges. If you truly want to understand yourself, your motivations, your attachments, your struggles, and your spiritual direction, you must uncover your treasure, because whatever you treasure shapes your heart, and whatever shapes your heart shapes your entire life. This script exists to guide you through that discovery, to help you confront uncomfortable truths, to help you break free from the illusions that keep your heart bound to the wrong things, to show you what happens when your treasure is misplaced, and what incredible transformation occurs when it is placed where it truly belongs. By the time you finish this message, your vision of yourself, your priorities, and your future will not be the same. When most people hear the word treasure, they imagine gold, wealth, or possessions. But Jesus did not say, where your money is, there your heart will be. He said treasure, a far deeper and broader term. Your treasure is whatever you assign supreme value to. It is anything you believe will give you identity, safety, fulfillment, or meaning. Treasure is revealed by what you pursue, what you protect, what you fear losing, and what you sacrifice for. Your treasure might be money, but it might also be approval from others, romantic attention, personal achievement, comfort, reputation, control, security, a relationship, a dream, an emotion, an image of self, a memory, or even a wound. You keep feeding. Treasure is the place your heart parks without being told to. It's the direction your emotions move when your mind is silent. Think of it this way. If someone could follow the trail of your thoughts during your quietest moments, they would find your treasure. If someone could calculate where your time goes when you are unstructured, they would find your treasure. If someone could observe what instantly affects your mood or self-worth, they would find your treasure. Your treasure is the thing that feels like it defines you. And because of that, your heart grows roots around it. The reason this topic is so powerful is because your treasure is always forming you. It is shaping your identity, molding your character, making your decisions, and steering your destiny, often without your awareness. And here's the dangerous part. You can treasure something that is too small to hold your life together. You can pour your heart into something incapable of sustaining it. You can give your heart to things that will ultimately break it. Understanding what you treasure is the beginning of understanding your entire inner world. When Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also," he revealed a one-directional truth. Your heart follows your treasure, not the other way around. Most people assume their treasure follows their heart, that we invest in what we already care about. But the principle actually works in reverse. Whatever you treat as your treasure begins to control your heart, your emotions, and your direction. This means your heart is not self-governing, it is treasure-governed. Your heart attaches itself to whatever you elevate. Consider an investor. Even if they had no emotional interest in a company, the moment they invest money into it, they start checking stock prices, reading reports, and caring about the company's future. Why? Because their treasure is there. Likewise, if someone idolizes a relationship, their emotional world becomes tied to the actions and moods of the other person. Their heart rises when the person is close and falls when the person withdraws. Your heart is like a compass needle. It points toward your treasure. And this has massive consequences. If your treasure is unstable, your heart will be unstable. If your treasure is temporary, your heart will be restless. If your treasure is external, your heart will be fragile. If your treasure is shallow, your heart will be shallow. But if your treasure is aligned with truth, purpose, integrity, and divine reality, then your heart becomes grounded, centered, and anchored. This is why Jesus didn't say, guard your heart from the world. He said, essentially, guard where you place your treasure, because that determines your heart. The heart follows treasure like gravity follows mass. You cannot bypass this principle. You cannot cheat it. You cannot resist it. Your heart is always being pulled. The question is, toward what? Treasure has such power over the heart because it taps into the deepest structures of human psychology and spiritual design. There are three powerful mechanisms at work: identity, attachment, and fear, desire pairing. Treasure shapes identity. Your sense of identity gravitates toward whatever you define as valuable. If your treasure is success, then failure becomes a threat to your very existence. If your treasure is approval, then rejection becomes devastating. If your treasure is beauty, aging becomes terrifying. If your treasure is intellect, ignorance becomes unbearable. Identity grows around treasure like vines around a trellis. Treasure creates emotional attachment. Humans bond with what they invest in. When you give time, energy, emotion, or sacrifice to something, your heart ties itself to it. This is why unhealthy relationships feel impossible to leave. You weren't attached to the person, you were attached to the internal treasure you placed in them. The dream, the fantasy, the identity, the hope, the projection. Treasure activates fear and desire. Treasure creates your strongest desires and your deepest fears. Whatever you treasure becomes what you crave most, what you fear losing the most, what affects your mood the most, what dictates your decisions the most. Treasure forms the emotional center of gravity inside you, a spiritual dimension. On a spiritual level, treasure determines allegiance. It determines what God you functionally serve, not the one you claim, but the one you actively obey. Most people imagine they serve God, faith, love, or good intentions, but in practice they obey the demands of their treasure. The treasure of approval commands them to people-please. The treasure of status commands them to compete. The treasure of comfort commands them to avoid growth. The treasure of fear commands them to self-protect. The treasure of ego commands them to defend themselves. Treasure is a master, your heart is the servant. Understanding how this works is essential, because only then can you truly grasp what happens when treasure is misplaced or placed in the right place. When your treasure is placed outside yourself, on outward achievements, possessions, validation, appearance, or status, your emotional world becomes dependent on conditions you cannot fully control. This creates a fragile and reactive life. Your self-worth becomes conditional. If your treasure is in how others see you, your identity rises and falls with their opinions. One negative comment can ruin your day. One moment of praise can inflate your ego. You become a puppet tied to strings you don't own. If your treasure is in success or productivity, you feel valuable only when accomplishing something. Rest becomes guilt. Failure becomes devastation. These are painful prisons disguised as ambition. You become easily manipulated. The world gains power over you. People gain power over you. Circumstances gain power over you. If someone controls your treasure, they control your heart. A boss, a partner, a friend, a parent. Anyone whose approval is treasured gains silent authority over your emotional life. This is how people become stuck in toxic dynamics. They aren't trapped by circumstances, they're trapped by their treasure. You develop chronic anxiety. Everything external is temporary, unstable, and unpredictable. And when your treasure is unstable, your heart becomes anxious. Questions constantly buzz in the mind. What if I lose what I've built? What if people stop liking me? What if this ends? What if they leave? What if I fail? Anxiety is not merely a fear problem, it is a treasure problem. You drift away from your true self. When your treasure is external, you begin to shape-shift to protect it. You become who you think others want you to be. You become who your goals demand, even if that version of you feels unnatural or empty. Your authentic voice becomes quieter. Your internal compass becomes faint. Your self disappears beneath layers of masks. You chase more but experience less. External treasure promises fulfillment but delivers exhaustion. You grind harder, push further, strive endlessly, yet feel no closer to peace. You become a traveler carrying heavy gold that keeps growing heavier, even as the journey becomes emptier. External treasure builds kingdoms that collapse the moment reality shifts. Not all internal treasure is healthy. Some people don't chase money or fame. Instead, they treasure internal states like pride, ego, fear, emotional wounds, or self-image. These are subtle, harder to detect, but just as destructive. When you treasure your ego, you begin to interpret every interaction through the lens of self-preservation. You become overly sensitive to correction. You defend yourself even when wrong. You compete even when unnecessary. You fear vulnerability because it threatens the idol of self-importance. Ego is a fragile treasure, constantly needing protection. When you treasure your pain, some people treasure the wounds they've carried for years, because those wounds give them identity, story, or emotional familiarity. Letting go feels like losing themselves. When pain becomes treasure, healing feels threatening, growth feels unsafe. Compassion feels undeserved. Your heart becomes anchored to suffering instead of freedom. When you treasure fear, fear becomes a strange kind of comfort. It keeps you safe, predictable, small, but at the cost of your destiny. You begin making decisions not based on potential, but on avoidance. Fear becomes the god you obey. When you treasure control, you become exhausted, trying to manage everything. People, outcomes, timing, perceptions. Control is a false treasure that offers the illusion of safety while draining life of spontaneity, joy, and trust. The danger of misaligned internal treasure: when the wrong internal qualities are treasured, you don't just lose peace, you lose alignment. You stand in your own way, you self-sabotage, you stall your purpose and shrink your soul. Internal treasure is powerful because it directs your entire inner world. But if the treasure is misaligned, your inner world becomes a battlefield instead of a sanctuary. When your treasure is placed in what is eternal, truth, purpose, integrity, spirit, God, the entire architecture of your inner life changes. You begin to live from a place of stability and clarity that external circumstances cannot shake. You gain an unshakable identity. Identity rooted in external things always feels fragile and temporary. But identity rooted in something eternal becomes grounded, whole, and secure. You no longer need achievements to feel valuable. You no longer need people to validate you. You no longer need constant reassurance. Your value becomes inherent, not conditional. You experience a deep inner peace. When your treasure is eternal, anxiety begins to dissolve. Why? Because what you treasure cannot be taken from you. Circumstances may change, seasons may shift, people may come and go, but your treasure remains intact. Peace becomes your natural state, not a temporary reward. You become emotionally resilient. Setbacks don't define you anymore. Criticism doesn't damage you. Loss doesn't destroy you. When your treasure is eternal, pain still hurts, but it doesn't hollow you out. Challenges refine you instead of breaking you. You can stand in storms without losing yourself. Your priorities align with your purpose. Suddenly, clarity appears. Decisions become easier. Your energy flows toward the right things. You stop wasting time on distractions, petty conflicts, and temporary pleasures. Your life becomes centered rather than scattered. You develop a spiritual center of gravity. When your treasure is in God, truth, and purpose, your heart becomes anchored. Temptations lose their pull. Fear loses its grip. Approval loses its power. You become someone who moves through life with direction instead of drifting. You become someone who lives from abundance instead of lack. You become someone who embodies peace rather than pursues it. The result: inner freedom. You no longer cling, You no longer chase, you no longer fear losing what is temporary. You live from fullness, not hunger, and fullness is the evidence of eternal treasure. Your destiny is not shaped by your intentions, it is shaped by your treasure. Your actions, habits, decisions, and long-term direction flow from what you value most, whether consciously or unconsciously. Misplaced treasure distorts identity. When you treasure the wrong things, you inevitably build the wrong identity. If success is your treasure, you become a performer. If approval is your treasure, you become a pleaser. If fear is your treasure, you become a hider. If relationships are your treasure, you become dependent. If status is your treasure, you become competitive. Your heart forms around whatever you elevate. This is why misplaced treasure always produces a distorted self, a version of you that is smaller, more fearful, more reactive, and less true. Misplaced treasure creates internal conflict. You cannot align your life with truth while treasuring lies. You cannot walk in peace while treasuring anxiety-producing things. You cannot grow while treasuring comfort. You cannot love deeply while treasuring self-protection. A divided treasure creates a divided heart, and a divided heart creates a conflicted life. Misplaced treasure creates predictable destinies. The treasure of comfort leads to stagnation. The treasure of ego leads to isolation. The treasure of money leads to emptiness. The treasure of approval leads to exhaustion. The treasure of relationships leads to heartbreak. The treasure of status leads to insecurity. Every misplaced treasure has a predictable ending. It cannot produce joy because it was never designed to carry your soul. When you treasure what is too small, your life becomes too small. Misplaced treasure blinds you to purpose. Purpose requires clarity, and clarity requires the right treasure. When your treasure is misplaced, you cannot recognize opportunities that align with your destiny. You say yes to distractions and no to growth. You follow impulses instead of wisdom. You cling to what is familiar instead of what is meant for you. Misplaced treasure doesn't just steal peace, it steals destiny. When your treasure is rightly placed on truth, purpose, God, spiritual alignment, your decision-making becomes radically different, not because you suddenly gain more discipline, but because your desires change, decisions become clearer. Most confusion in life is not intellectual, it is emotional. You know the right path, but you hesitate because your treasure is tied to something else. Once your treasure is realigned, hesitation fades. You begin to see choices in terms of alignment instead of pressure or fear. You stop asking, "What will people think?" and you start asking, "What aligns with my purpose?" You choose long-term over short-term. When your treasure is eternal, you stop sacrificing your future for momentary comfort. You become willing to endure temporary difficulty for meaningful outcomes. Self-control becomes easier because you're no longer fighting desire, you're redirecting it. A rightly placed treasure creates consistency without forcing it. You stop making decisions from fear. If your treasure is approval, fear of rejection controls your choices. If your treasure is security, fear of risk controls your choices. If your treasure is comfort, fear of discomfort controls your choices. But when your treasure is truth and purpose, fear loses its leverage. You start making decisions from clarity, courage, and conviction. You become more decisive. Indecision is often a sign of misplaced treasure. You cannot choose confidently when your heart is pulled in different directions, but a heart anchored to eternal treasure is unified, focused, and steady. You become someone who knows what to do and does it. The emotional impact of treasure placement. Your emotional life is one of the clearest indicators of where your treasure actually is. Treasure doesn't only shape decisions, it shapes feelings, reactions, and inner stability. Misplaced treasure creates emotional fragility. If your treasure is external, your moods become easily disrupted. You feel insecure when someone is distant. You feel anxious when outcomes shift. You feel envious when someone else succeeds. You feel threatened by change. Emotional fragility is born from unstable treasure. Misplaced treasure creates emotional highs and lows. A heart tied to unstable treasure swings wildly, high when praised, low when ignored, high when succeeding, low when struggling, high when wanted, low when uncertain. It's exhausting to live this way, swinging between emotional extremes. Rightly placed treasure creates emotional stability. When your treasure is eternal, your heart becomes less reactive. You no longer ride the roller coaster of circumstances. You feel emotions fully, but you are not ruled by them. Peace becomes normal, not rare. You can walk through disappointment without despair. You can experience success without arrogance. You can endure uncertainty without panic. Emotional freedom emerges when your treasure is placed correctly. You stop trying to control everything. You stop fearing loss. You stop depending on others to feel whole. You stop chasing emotional validation. Your heart finally breathes. You become emotionally grounded, secure from within rather than from without. Your treasure doesn't only transform your internal world, it transforms how you interact with others. Relationships are deeply influenced by what you value most, even if you're unaware of it. Misplaced treasure creates relational imbalance. If you treasure approval, you overgive, overextend, and lose boundaries trying to please people. If you treasure control, you tighten your grip, micromanage loved ones, and suffocate connection. If you treasure validation through relationships, you become dependent, clingy, or fearful of abandonment. If you treasure superiority, you become competitive, dismissive, or arrogant. Relationships start to revolve around your inner needs instead of genuine connection. Misplaced treasure often creates toxic dynamics. When your treasure is external or unhealthy, you subconsciously choose relationships that reinforce it. For example, if you treasure chaos, you attract chaotic people. If you treasure validation, you attract users or manipulators. If you treasure caretaking as identity, you attract emotionally dependent. If you treasure ego, you attract people who challenge your sense of dominance. Your relationships begin to mirror your treasure. When your treasure is eternal, you become a healthier person. Right treasure creates healthy relational posture. You don't cling. You don't control. You don't fear rejection. You don't use others to fill emotional gaps. You don't require relationships to define you. You approach relationships from fullness, not hunger. You can love freely because you're not trying to extract identity, peace, or meaning from another human being. You attract better relationships. Naturally, a rightly aligned treasure reshapes your relational patterns. You naturally choose healthier people because your heart is healthier. You stop tolerating chaos, manipulation, or emotional games. You value connection over validation, honesty over approval, love over ego. Healthy treasure doesn't just transform you, it transforms your relational world. Real change begins when you intentionally shift your treasure. This requires honesty, awareness, and daily alignment. Below are practical steps to reorient your heart. Identify your current treasure. Ask yourself, what do I think about most? What affects my emotions the most? What do I fear losing the most? What do I sacrifice for without hesitation? What do I hope will save me or prove my worth? Your treasure reveals itself through your emotional reactions and habitual behaviors. Acknowledge the cost of misplaced treasure. Write down how your current treasure has created stress, distorted identity, controlled your emotions, shaped bad decisions, damaged relationships, blocked your purpose. Seeing the cost creates internal motivation to change. Choose a higher treasure. You cannot remove a treasure by force. You must replace it with something greater. Examples of higher treasure include inner growth, truth, integrity, spiritual connection, purpose, meaningful contribution, alignment with God's principles, character. Development. You rise by choosing what is worth rising toward. Shift daily attention, and investment treasure grows where time flows. Reorientation requires daily practices, meditation or prayer journaling, setting intentional goals, limiting distractions, reducing dependence on approval, investing in what aligns with purpose. Every day you water something. Make sure you're watering the right treasure. Make decisions that support the new treasure. Treasure is reinforced by choices. When you take one action aligned with the new treasure, you weaken the old treasure's influence. Small decisions eventually rewire desire. Surrender what you cannot control. Reorienting treasure requires releasing attachments to outcomes, to other people's opinions, to timelines, to comfort, to perfection. Letting go is not losing. It is freeing your heart to attach to the right treasure. Before transformation can occur, honesty must happen. This section is not theoretical. It is personal. Take a moment and sit with these questions slowly. Let the answers rise without judgment. What do you think about when your mind is quiet? What your mind returns to without force reveals your treasure. What changes your mood the fastest? If someone's approval, a performance, a number, or someone's attention can instantly shift your emotional state, you've located a treasure. What do you fear losing the most? Fear reveals attachment. Attachment reveals treasure. What do you sacrifice for without hesitation? Time, energy, money, sleep, peace. What do you willingly trade for? What makes you feel enough or not enough? This question is one of the most revealing. Your sense of enoughness is tied to treasure like a shadow to the body. What do you use to escape discomfort? Your coping mechanisms often point to the treasure you seek to protect. What do you believe will finally make you feel complete? This is the treasure you subconsciously chase. Let these answers sit openly before you, not to shame you, but to reveal you, because clarity is the beginning of freedom. Treasure cannot change until it is exposed, and once it is exposed, you regain the power to redirect your heart. When you truly grasp where your treasure is, you begin a transformation that reshapes the deepest structures of your life. This transformation doesn't come from forcing change, but from shifting the gravitational center of your heart. Your heart is transformed. A heart anchored in eternal treasure becomes stable, grounded, peaceful, resilient, fearless, present. You no longer live in emotional reactivity. You begin responding to life from a place of depth rather than urgency. Your character is refined. Treasure determines behavior. Behavior determines character. Character determines destiny. When your treasure is aligned with purpose and truth, you naturally grow into someone who is humble without self-neglect, confident without arrogance, strong without harshness, compassionate without enabling, wise without fear, generous without depletion. Your character becomes whole because your heart is whole. Your destiny becomes clear. Misplaced treasure clouds destiny. Right treasure clarifies it. As your heart aligns with truth, you begin to recognize real opportunities, attract the right people, make wiser decisions, walk away from distractions, pursue meaningful goals, step into higher purpose. Your life gains momentum not through striving, but through alignment. You live from abundance, not scarcity. Scarcity is the mindset of a misplaced treasure. Abundance is the mindset of a rightly placed one. You no longer chase what you already possess internally. You become a giver instead of a taker, a creator instead of a consumer, a light instead of a seeker of light. This is the transformation that happens when you truly grasp the meaning of treasure. Your life becomes larger, lighter, deeper, and clearer. You have walked through a journey that many people never take, the journey of understanding your own heart. Most live unaware of their treasure and therefore unaware of themselves. But once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. The question is no longer, do I have treasure? The question is my treasure worthy of my heart? Because your heart will follow. It will attach. It will grow roots. It will surrender itself. You cannot change that mechanism. It is built into the human design. But you can change where you aim it, and that single shift changes everything. If your treasure is unstable, your heart will always fear. If your treasure is shallow, your heart will always hunger. If your treasure is external, your heart will always cling. But if your treasure is eternal, grounded in truth, purpose, spirit, God, your heart becomes free. Free to love without fear, free to grow without shame, free to let go without losing yourself, free to live with purpose instead of pressure. This is the life you were meant for, a life directed not by impulse but by alignment, not by insecurity but by identity, not by noise but by purpose. The invitation stands before you. Place your treasure where your heart can finally rest. Place your treasure where your soul becomes whole. Place your treasure where life begins. 1. The weight of a world in turmoil. To understand why Jesus' phrase, "My yoke is easy," was so revolutionary, you must first understand the world in which he spoke it. His words were not floating in an abstract spiritual vacuum. They were spoken to real people whose lives were shaped by political fear, cultural tension, religious exhaustion, and deep spiritual hunger. A land, once proud of its identity, was now under the boot of the Roman Empire, a world superpower with soldiers on every corner and laws that could not be questioned. Taxes were heavy, emotions were tense, and hope felt like a fading memory. And yet, behind the political pressure was an even heavier burden, the crushing weight of trying to live up to a religious system that demanded more than any human could ever give. In this context, Jesus didn't merely teach, he interrupted the despair of an entire generation. When he said, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest," he wasn't speaking to people who had a mild case of stress. He was speaking to a nation being suffocated physically, emotionally, spiritually, and socially. To them, the idea of an easy yoke was almost unthinkable. Life was anything but easy. Religion was anything but restful. Everything in their world was heavy. And into this heaviness, Jesus opened his heart. 2. Jewish life under Roman occupation. Imagine waking up every morning knowing your land is not your own. Roman soldiers march through villages. Roman law overrides your law. Roman rulers demand taxes you can barely afford. Every family felt the pressure. To resist Rome was to risk execution. To submit to Rome was to feel humiliated. To ignore Rome was impossible. Most people lived on the edge financially, emotionally, and spiritually. Fear was normal, anxiety was common, grief was everywhere. And yet, beyond the external oppression, something internal was breaking too. People didn't simply want relief from Rome. They wanted relief from the tiring expectation to be good enough for God. Rome was the burden they could see. Religion was the burden they could feel. This combination made life almost unbearable. 3. The weight of religious expectation. Judaism, in the first century, was not the simple, elegant faith God gave Moses. Over the centuries, layers of rules, interpretations, additions, and traditions had been built on top of the original commands. What began as a covenant relationship had become a system of pressure. The Pharisees, the experts of the law, believed they were helping the people honor God, but their methods were rigid, their interpretations were strict, their expectations were nearly impossible. The result? People lived under a spiritual cloud of not-enoughness. No matter how hard they tried, they always fell short. Not praying enough, not memorizing enough, not sacrificing enough, not avoiding sin carefully enough, not observing every rule exactly enough. Religion had become a treadmill with no finish line. The common person believed God was perpetually disappointed with them. They lived with constant fear of failing him. And then Jesus arrived not to condemn them, but to rescue them from the very system that was supposed to save them. 4. The gravitational pull of guilt. Guilt was everywhere. It wasn't guilt from committing crimes. It was guilt from being human. People felt guilty for not understanding Scripture well enough, guilty for not keeping every Sabbath rule precisely, guilty for having doubts or fears, guilty for feeling tired, discouraged, or overwhelmed. Life itself seemed sinful. Religion was supposed to draw people to God, but instead it pushed them into cycles of endless self-condemnation. This burden, the burden of believing that God's love must be earned, was the heaviest yoke of all. When Jesus said, "My burden is light," he was speaking directly into this emotional prison. 5. Why Jesus' words were so shocking into this world of pressure and despair. Jesus spoke a message nobody expected. The kingdom of God is near. God is not far away. God is not angry with you. God is not impossible to please. God does not require you to destroy yourself to satisfy him. God is gentle and humble in heart. God's way gives rest, not exhaustion. Imagine hearing this after a lifetime of believing the opposite. Imagine hearing a rabbi tell you that God's yoke is easy. For the first-century Jewish listener, this was not merely comforting, it was revolutionary. You didn't need to strive endlessly. You didn't need to fear continually. You didn't need to prove yourself daily. Jesus was offering a relationship instead of a religious performance, a partnership instead of punishment, a yoke that fits instead of a yoke that crushes. This is why crowds gathered. This is why sinners felt safe. This is why the weary felt hope rising in their chests. Someone finally told them the truth about God, and that someone was God himself. 6. The meaning of a yoke in ancient culture. To fully understand Jesus' words, we must step into the agricultural world of the first century. Most people were farmers or lived close to the rhythms of farming life. The image of a yoke was familiar to everyone. A yoke was a wooden beam carved to fit around the neck of oxen, a tool used to keep two animals walking together, a way to share a load so neither animal carried it alone, a symbol of partnership, alignment, and shared purpose. A farmer who cared for his animals did not simply create a yoke. He crafted a well-fitting, tailored yoke, one shaped to the body of the animal so it wouldn't rub, bruise, or injure them. A good yoke meant less pain, more strength, longer endurance, better cooperation, more efficiency. A bad yoke meant blisters, bleeding exhaustion, constant pain, frustration, early death. Jesus didn't say, "I remove the yoke." He said, "My yoke is easy." This means he doesn't remove purpose, direction, or responsibility from our lives. Instead, he gives us a way to live that fits us, one that is aligned with how we were created, one that does not injure us, one that makes us stronger and more free. In the ancient world, rabbis used the word yoke metaphorically as well. A yoke was a rabbi's teaching, interpretation of Scripture, lifestyle expectations, way of following God. To take on a rabbi's yoke meant to apprentice under him, to adopt his worldview, to follow his rhythm of life. So when Jesus said, "Take my yoke upon you," he was inviting his followers into his way of life, his rhythm, his posture, his gentleness, his relationship with the Father, and his understanding of what truly matters. This was not a burden, it was an invitation into alignment. 7. The burdens people lived with daily. When you combine Roman oppression with religious pressure, you get a society filled with chronic exhaustion. The average person in Jesus' time carried burdens that touched every part of life. Physical burdens, long hours of manual labor, heavy taxes that consumed nearly half their income, regular food insecurity, harsh weather and limited resources, lack of medical care, emotional burdens, fear of Roman soldiers, anxiety over finances, hopelessness about the future, deep grief over oppression, constant comparison to religious elites, spiritual burdens, the feeling that God was always disappointed, shame from failing to keep hundreds of minor laws, Confusion about Scripture. A constant internal voice saying, "You are not enough," pressure to perform to earn God's approval, social burdens, judgment from neighbors, fear of being labeled unclean, shame from sins or mistakes, pressure to fit into religious systems, worry about the safety of family members. These burdens did not come one at a time, they compounded. A person who felt physically exhausted was also emotionally fatigued. A person who felt spiritually inadequate was also socially insecure. This is why Jesus' words struck so deeply. He was not a detached teacher discussing abstract theology. He was speaking directly to the pain people lived with every day. 8. A people desperate for relief. We often forget that people in Jesus' time were just as human as we are. Their anxieties, dreams, worries and insecurities were not ancient. They were universal. They longed for a sense of worth, a sense of belonging, a sense of security, a sense of purpose, a sense of peace. They wanted to know they mattered. They wanted to know God saw them. They wanted to know their suffering had meaning. They wanted to know their efforts were not wasted. They wanted to know they were not spiritually hopeless. Religion, instead of soothing these longings, often made them worse. Imagine a doctor adding pressure to a broken bone instead of treating it. Imagine a teacher increasing homework for a child who is already overwhelmed. Imagine a spiritual leader demanding more effort from someone who is already drowning in responsibilities. This is what first-century Jews experienced. They were being crushed by systems that promise spiritual life but produce spiritual suffocation. This is why Jesus' message was like oxygen to a suffocating society. 9. The spiritual leaders of the day, the Pharisees and scribes, believed they were doing the will of God. Many of them were sincere. Many genuinely thought they were protecting the purity of the faith. But sincerity without compassion becomes cruelty, and passion without humility becomes pride. Jesus described them vividly. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear. They lay them on people's shoulders. They will not lift a finger to help. They love to be seen as holy. They strain out a gnat but swallow a camel. The problem was not the law itself. The problem was how the law had been weaponized. The leaders acted as spiritual gatekeepers, deciding who was acceptable and who was not. They created a world where holiness was measured by external performance instead of internal transformation. They believed righteousness was something you could achieve through perfect behavior, perfect obedience, perfect ritual, perfect sacrifice. But Jesus taught a different way. Holiness begins with the heart. Transformation begins with grace. Righteousness begins with relationship, not performance. 10. The growing despair of the people. By the time Jesus appeared on the scene, most people had quietly accepted the lie that God was unreachable. They believed they would never be spiritual enough. They would never be pure enough. They would never be obedient enough. They would never understand enough. They would never measure up. If you ask the average Jewish man or woman whether they thought God was happy with them, the answer was almost always, "No, I'm not good enough." This despair was fertile soil for the gospel. People were ready hungry for a message that didn't simply demand more effort, but offered more rest. And then Jesus came, not demanding, not condemning, not performing holiness to impress, not shaming the weak. He came with gentleness, with truth, with authority, with rest, a rest unlike anything they had ever known. 11. The psychological toll of never feeling enough. When Jesus stepped into the religious atmosphere of his day, he found a people not just physically tired or spiritually discouraged. They were psychologically exhausted. Centuries before the terms mental health, anxiety disorders, or depression existed, people were suffering deeply from the internal weight of trying to be perfect. A spiritual system based on rule-keeping and performance creates predictable emotional consequences. A. Chronic anxiety. People feared every mistake, every impurity, every misstep. What if I accidentally broke the Sabbath? What if I forgot a detail of the law? What if God rejects me? Anxiety grew like vines in the soul. B. Persistent shame. Shame is not the feeling of, I did something wrong. Shame is the feeling of, something is wrong with me. And that is exactly what many people believed. They weren't just struggling, they were fundamentally flawed. C. Deep hopelessness. If spiritual success feels impossible, eventually people stop trying. A lifetime of failure conditions you to expect nothing good. D. Exhaustion. Striving without rest drains a person's emotional reserves. People lived with a constant internal pressure. Do more. Try harder. Be better. Don't fail. Don't fall. Don't disappoint God. Jesus did not ignore this psychological toll. He addressed it head-on with his invitation, "Come to me, and I will give you rest." Rest from what? From anxiety, from shame, from hopelessness, from emotional exhaustion. He was offering inner healing, not just spiritual teaching. 12. The social hierarchy of spirituality. In Jesus' day, spirituality was not a level playing field. There was an unspoken hierarchy. Pharisees seen as the most holy, scribes seen as the most knowledgeable, priests seen as intermediaries between God and man, men viewed as spiritually responsible, women valued but often minimized spiritually, children considered insignificant in religious discussions, tax collectors, sinners, and the uneducated considered spiritually hopeless. This hierarchy created two painful realities. A. Some people were exalted. They believed they were spiritually superior, closer to God, more acceptable. B. Others were crushed. They believed they were spiritually inferior, distant from God, never acceptable. Into this hierarchy, Jesus spoke revolutionary words. "Blessed are the poor in spirit. The last shall be first. Let the little children come to me. The tax collectors and prostitutes enter the kingdom before you. Whoever humbles himself is the greatest." Jesus didn't just tear down the hierarchy, he turned it upside down. He placed honor on the dishonored. He placed value on the overlooked. He offered hope to the hopeless. He gave spiritual access to the spiritually rejected. This is why his message was intoxicating to the weary. 13. A culture where God felt distant. Most people in Jesus' day believed in God deeply. They believed he was real, powerful, holy, and just. But they also believed he was far away, difficult to approach, impossible to please, easily angered, primarily concerned with rules. They knew God was holy, but they didn't know God was near. They knew God was righteous, but they didn't know God was gentle. They knew God had standards, but they didn't know God had compassion. They knew God gave laws, but they didn't know God gave rest. This distance shaped everything. How they prayed, how they viewed of themselves, how they treated each other, how they interpreted Scripture, how they understood suffering, how they imagined the Messiah. Jesus' mission was not just to save people from sin, it was to reveal the heart of the Father. When he said, "Come to me," he wasn't just speaking as a teacher, he was speaking as God himself, extending a hand. 14. The people's expectation of the Messiah. The Jewish people longed for a Messiah, but their expectation was shaped by their circumstances. Given centuries of oppression, they expected a military leader, someone to defeat Rome, someone to restore political sovereignty, someone to elevate Israel above its enemies, someone strong, fierce, and victorious, someone who would use force. So when Jesus came healing, teaching, and welcoming the broken, he didn't fit their expectation. He didn't carry a sword. He didn't raise an army. He didn't speak of rebellion. He didn't overthrow Rome. His kingdom was not political, it was internal. His war was not against soldiers, it was against lies. His victory was not won through violence, but through love. This confused many, but it comforted the weary. Rome could crush bodies, religion could crush hearts, but Jesus came to set both free. He came with a kingdom not built on control but on compassion, not on fear but on forgiveness, not on power but on peace. In this kingdom, the yoke was not heavy, it was healing. 15. The rising tension between Jesus and the religious establishment. As Jesus healed, taught, and restored life to the broken, crowds followed him everywhere. The religious leaders grew increasingly alarmed. Why? Because Jesus was undermining the very system that gave them power. He offered forgiveness without rituals, healing without payment, wisdom without formal schooling, access to God without intermediaries. To the Pharisees, this was dangerous. They feared losing influence, losing authority, losing respect, losing control over the people, but most of all, they feared Jesus because he exposed the truth. Their system didn't work. When Jesus said, "My yoke is easy," he wasn't just comforting the people. He was confronting the leaders. He was declaring, "Your yoke is not from God. Your teaching is not bringing rest. Your system is not healing the soul. You are weighing people down, not lifting them up." This public exposure created tension that would eventually lead to the cross. 16. The people's quiet hope. Even before Jesus said a word, people sensed something different about him. He looked at them with compassion, not judgment. He spoke with authority, not arrogance. He touched the unclean without hesitation. He welcomed the outcast without shame. He taught with clarity instead of complexity. He called God Father instead of Judge. This stirred a quiet hope in the hearts of the weary. Could this be the Messiah? Could this be the one who finally reveals God's true heart? Could this be the one who gives rest instead of rules? Could this be the one who sees us not as failures, but as beloved? The hunger in the people was not just for miracles, it was for meaning, for mercy, for rest. Jesus' words were not merely comforting, they awakened a hope that had been buried under centuries of striving. 17. A world trapped between two yokes. By the time Jesus began his public ministry, people felt trapped between two powerful forces. A. The yoke of Rome, overwhelming taxes, political oppression, constant threat of violence, humiliation, and loss of independence. B. The yoke of religion, endless rules, heavy expectations, shame-based motivation, fear of disappointing God. Both yokes were heavy. Both yokes exhausted the soul. Both yokes created a world where rest was impossible. Jesus didn't come to replace one heavy yoke with another. He came to offer a third way, a yoke that was easy and a burden that was light. Not because life would be without challenges, not because discipleship required nothing, but because Jesus himself would carry the weight. He didn't say, "Try harder, do better, earn more." He said, "Learn from me, walk with me, I will give you rest." He was offering the one thing they had never experienced, a yoke built on relationship instead of religion. 18. What rest really meant to a first-century Jew. When Jesus promised, "Rest for your souls," people heard something far more profound than simply a break from busyness. They heard echoes of shalom, a deep, wholeness-oriented peace, mind, body, emotions, and relationships all aligned. Sabbath, a divine rhythm built into creation, a reminder that humans were not created to live in endless striving. The Exodus story, freedom from slavery, not just physical slavery, but the slavery of soul-crushing oppression. God's promise. Through Jeremiah, ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. Rest was not a nap. Rest was restoration. Rest was renewal. Rest was freedom. Rest was God's active involvement in making life whole again. This was the rest Jesus offered. This was the rest people had been longing for, but could not find in their religious system. 19. The kind of people Jesus spoke to most. When Jesus gave his invitation, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden," he was speaking specifically to those who felt weighed down. These included A. The poor, those crushed under taxes and endless survival pressures. B. The sick, those labeled as cursed or unclean by society. C. Women often overlooked or undervalued in religious settings. D. Children treated as nuisances or irrelevant in spiritual matters. E. The uneducated, believing they would never understand Scripture well enough. F. Sinners and outcasts, those told they could never earn God's acceptance. G. The emotionally exhausted, people carrying wounds no one else saw. These were the ones Jesus targeted with his compassion. These were the ones he lifted up. These were the ones he called blessed. These were the ones he offered a well-fitted, life-giving yoke. Jesus' invitation was not for the strong, it was for the struggling. Not for the perfect, it was for the broken. Not for the spiritually elite, it was for the spiritually exhausted. 20. The cultural power of a rabbi's invitation. When a rabbi said to a student, "Take my yoke upon you," it was more than an invitation. It was an honor reserved for the most promising disciples. Only the best of the best were chosen. Only the smartest, most disciplined, most impressive were accepted. Jesus broke this rule. He invited fishermen, tax collectors, outcasts, the curious, the wounded, the overlooked, the unqualified. He welcomed people others rejected. He pursued disciples others ignored. He honored those society dishonored. His invitation was radical because it communicated one shocking truth. You don't have to be perfect to walk with me. Jesus didn't choose disciples based on merit. He chose them based on willingness. The qualification was not perfection, it was simply coming to him. 21. Jesus' authority to offer rest. Why could Jesus promise something the religious leaders could not? Because his authority was not human, it was divine. He spoke of rest, not as a suggestion, but as a certainty. I will give you rest. This was not the voice of a rabbi trying to interpret the law. This was the voice of the lawgiver himself. He wasn't offering a new philosophy, a new set of rituals, a new level of discipline, a new religious program. He was offering himself. Only God can give rest to the human soul. Only God can heal the internal fractures of the heart. Only God can lift burdens and destroy shame. Only God can make a yoke easy. Jesus wasn't just teaching rest, he was rest. This is why his presence calmed storms, why his voice comforted the terrified, why his touch healed the broken, why his words brought hope to the oppressed. He didn't merely describe the easy yoke, he embodied it. 22. A world ready for the revelation. By the time Jesus spoke, the words recorded in Matthew 11:28-30, the world was aching for a revelation of God's true character. People needed a father instead of a taskmaster, compassion instead of criticism, healing instead of humiliation, hope instead of despair, relationship instead of religion, rest instead of restlessness. The timing of his message was perfect. Spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, socially, the people were ready. They were exhausted enough to listen, broken enough to be open, hungry enough to hope. Jesus stepped into that hunger with a message that lit up their souls. Come to me, learn from me. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. For the first time in their lives, someone wasn't asking them to carry more. He was offering to carry their burdens with them. 23. The transition into the heart of the message. Everything we've explored in section 1 was necessary to understand one central truth. Jesus' words only make sense against the backdrop of a heavy, crushing world. You cannot appreciate the beauty of an easy yoke until you have felt the weight of a difficult one. You cannot grasp the kindness of Jesus until you see the harshness of the systems around him. You cannot understand the gift of rest until you understand the pain of exhaustion. Now that we've explored the world Jesus spoke into, we can finally explore the heart behind his invitation. In Section 2, we will move deeper into his emotions, his tone, his motives, his heart, and the surprising kindness behind his words. Come to me. The easy yoke was not a theological concept. It was an expression of Jesus' tender heart toward the weary. Jesus meant when he said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." It takes the viewer on a journey through the historical context of a yoke, the spiritual implications of walking in partnership with Christ, the release from self-imposed burdens, and the transformation that happens when someone finally sees, not just intellectually, but spiritually, how living under Jesus' gentle leadership frees the mind, heals the heart, breaks anxiety, and leads into rest. It ends with an invitation for the audience to personally experience that freedom,